Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Fire Pit Chat. We're going to wait a couple minutes to let people come on in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Fire Pit Chat. It has been a full year since I spoke to you about Derryfield's intention to be on school daily in the fall of 2020. And at that time, we laid out health guidelines that would enable us to do so. I want to just take a moment to acknowledge the incredible cooperation of our faculty, our staff, but also our parents and our students who just, all the hard work of everyone united made it all happen this year. Tonight is about setting goals for the future, for next fall, as a Derryfield community together. And the goals pertain to our ability to peel back some of the health guidelines and restore events and activities that we've really missed this year. Then we'll set out some benchmarks that we need to reach in order to make those goals a reality. Tonight is also about answering questions, and I'm so glad that we have my friend Mike Hirshhorn here from Fusion Cell. He is our Fusion Cell epidemiology consultant. He has an extensive background in working on health policy on multiple air bases and now consulting with businesses and schools. So Mike, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So what I'm going to ask you to do starting right away is to put any questions you have for Mike in the chat, and I'll give those to Mike at the end of our little presentation. These might be questions about health guidelines, the pandemic, vaccines, any kind of questions that you have. So before we begin, I just want to start with sort of the humble reality that there are two caveats to anything we say when we're planning in these times. The first is that the coronavirus is changeable, and we have certainly learned all of that it's hard to predict. And the second is that we will, of course, follow New Hampshire state guidelines. And so we have seen that guidance can change quite quickly in some cases, but then like in last summer, very slowly. So those are the two kind of mitigating factors to the kinds of planning that we'll talk about that we're hopeful that we'll do this summer. So what are our goals for next year? Well, from an educational perspective, our top goal is to eliminate the need for distancing. We know that the usual Derryfield classroom is by far the most effective way to educate students. And we know that students work collaboratively so well, grappling with important ideas, getting peer feedback, working together closely on a gadget or a machine. Distancing, by contrast, inhibits movement, inhibits freedom, makes social interactions and mixing difficult, and really inhibits the physicality that makes our classes so engaging. We want to return to lessons like the kinds where kids create a gallery walk, moving from piece to piece, viewing everybody's work and commenting. We want students to be able to go to the board en masse and solve math problems. We want students to share ideas with many different classmates because their understanding will be more sophisticated if they do. Distance also strains personal connections and makes it harder to make new friends. The second goal we have is that we want to eliminate the need for masks. Teachers have trouble reading students' facial expressions to gauge their understanding. Some students retreat from participation due to the emotional distance that masks and distancing in the classroom bring. And masks can make it hard to hear, as we all know. Research shows that students learn best when they're safe and known and deep relationships among teachers and students develop best in person, where people can read each other's facial expressions in full, unmasked. Our third goal is that virtual learning will be only used for snow days. We'll have that one first snow holiday, and then after that, we'll use virtual learning for snow days. Students can't have the full experience when some in class are virtual and others are in person. The nature of the lessons has to be adapted and changed to accommodate virtual students. A physics teacher mentioned to me last week, we built a motor in class on Tuesday, but the virtual student couldn't. Having a virtual group member can be challenging for students. Science classes want to be free to roam outdoors into nature or to go to the makerspace without worrying that they've left someone, the virtual student, out. And so much of our learning is performance-based, and performances are much better in person. A fourth goal is to end the strict cohorting that we did this year that was all just in case we had to contact trace. So we hope to return in the middle school to our practices of very intentionally mixing kids together so they make more friends, meet the most people, and reduce cliques. And for upper schoolers, eliminating cohorts will enable them to have much greater freedom of movement and choice during their free periods, as well as all the educational advantages that I already mentioned. So thinking about all those goals, Mike, what is it that we need to do as a community to reach those goals?
Great questions. So there are three metrics that I would look at, that we are going to look at as we assess the ability to start loosening some of the restrictions that we felt this year. Two of these benchmarks are going to be internal benchmarks, so internal to the Derryfield school. One is going to be a consideration for the external, so what's going on in the state of New Hampshire. So the first benchmark is vaccination rates among teachers. Right now, and this is super positive, but 93% of faculty and staff have been vaccinated, fully vaccinated. So that is amazing. So that's a benchmark you can check off the list. The second piece is that internal student benchmark of vaccinations. And we're going to talk about population mechanics a little bit later on, but really the benchmark we're looking for at a minimum is about 57% of students vaccinated to start making this a safe environment to start reducing restrictions. And then that external benchmark that we talked about. So that external benchmark is monitoring what's going on in the state of New Hampshire and watching those case rates and trying to make sure that what we're doing is consistent with what the CDC and with what the state of New Hampshire is putting out there around rates per 100,000. So the target to be under is 140 new cases per day in New Hampshire. And that puts it at about 10 per 100,000. And that's important because the CDC lists that as a moderate risk. The state of New Hampshire lists it as substantial. So it's kind of the highest category that the state of New Hampshire has, but it's an external factor. There's still those internal pieces that really drive what happens during the classroom experience.
Great. So it seems, before I go on to my next question for Mike, it seems that our chat isn't working tonight. And so if you could email your questions to this address, communications@derryfield.org. So once again, if you could email your questions to communications, plural, communications with an S, @derryfield.org, then my colleague Annie will hand me over the questions and I can ask them of Mike. Great. So Mike, I get to dominate with my questions then if the chat's not working yet. So when we reach each benchmark, what improves for the school? What do we earn at sort of each benchmark?
Yeah, first, so with faculty and staff, considering the way that faculty and staff were kind of cohorted to each individual section last year, now that they're fully vaccinated, their risk of getting or transmitting COVID is significantly less. So you'll see teachers being able to move through different classrooms, through different grades potentially, have more interactions with more students because now the risk has been reduced by that vaccination rate. The second piece, student vaccination. So once you get at or above 57%, that's when you're going to see some changes to distancing and masks. So distancing and masks might become optional. So this still gives each student the choice to wear a mask if they feel that that's the appropriate risk reduction method for them to keep distance as they feel, once again, is appropriate. But the bigger piece is going to be the reduction of cohorts across those grades, as you were talking about, is one of the goals. So more free-flowing students and the ability to interact and bring back some of those in-person interactions that have been lacking over the last year. So in the state of New Hampshire, those external factors, once those reach the benchmark under 140 cases per day, which we're moving toward pretty closely now, this is where we start looking at things like stopping those screenings, those daily screenings, including temperatures.
Parents
Bring
will love
back,
that. They will love that, that Mike.
yeah, because I mean, it shows that the cases are dropping within the state, so the risk to each student is dropping within the state. As you layer in vaccinations with that, the risk is further reduced. So we still will 100% ask, if you are sick, stay home. But what we are not going to require is you to tell us every day that you are healthy. The assumption is that if you're in school, you're healthy, and everybody is going to play by that rule.
Excellent. So, Mike, our teachers and our school leaders really need to know as soon as possible what kind of classroom, distanced or not, we should plan for. And that's why at the end of this presentation, to all parents, please check your email. It should be in the very top of your email, a message from Derryfield School that says intent, state letter of intent. And if you could respond by letting us know your intentions regarding vaccinating your student, your Derryfield students, that would be immensely helpful in our ability to plan. Now, we understand that there are some families who don't intend to get vaccinated, and we respect their privacy around the reasons for their choice. And students, please respect your classmates' choices around vaccine. At this time, we're not planning to mandate vaccination, but we really need to know whether you plan to or not as soon as possible. So, Mike, could you? I'm going to ask you some questions that we've already received from parents and from students about the teen vaccine and the children's vaccine that's soon going to be available, if that's okay. So, the
Perfect.
first question I have is, can you help us understand how the vaccines work? What studies have been done to show their efficacy?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing I will say is that there is a absolutely wonderful book out there called Codebreaker, and it dives into the world of RNA technology, how it evolved to where we are now, and really what the future looks like for this pretty promising technology that's out there. So if you get a chance, stop by your local library, pick it up for free and read it. I'm about halfway through, but I have to let it dry out. I dropped in a puddle the other day. So
You're a library risk member.
yeah. But really, the basics of the vaccine are to take a small little piece of messenger RNA and use a mechanism to get it into your own cells. And that little piece of RNA then codes for a protein that looks very similar to the spike protein on COVID-19. So your body has the ability to recognize and fight off what it thinks is an infection of an otherwise healthy cell. So your own cell is only attacking that one little piece, that spike protein. So your body gets familiar with it. And then over time, over the course of a couple days, that spike protein will degrade. It will get recycled or excreted. And you are back to normal. So your body goes through this cycle. Every time that you get that first shot, the time that you get the second shot, and then 2 weeks later, you are fully vaccinated. So your body will recognize it. The studies, the technology dates back about 20 years. Right now, BioNTech or BioNTech, depending on how you say it, the company that worked with Pfizer to produce this, they currently have 19 or so drugs in the pipeline, most of which are using mRNA technology for different pieces. So very specific cancer fighting pieces, very specific rare genetic disorder help and relief for those. So this isn't something that's new. It's just a new use of an existing technology. So the BioNTech, Moderna, they have both gone through clinical trials. Now, they may have seemed rushed, and that's because there was some efficiencies gained back. Usually it takes a while for a drug to come onto market, but with Operation Warp Speed, there was a combination of phase 1, phase 2 clinical trials. Phase 3 started very soon after, and while that was all going on, all the manufacturing pieces were subsidized by the government so that these companies could, once they get emergency use authorization, ship out immediately. And so it's interesting the way that it happened. Um, but remember that the entire world is dealing with COVID, and the entire world has devoted unlimited manpower and unlimited money to making sure that vaccines are available. And it's not just the four big ones that we see with AstraZeneca, Johnson Johnson, Pfizer, and Moderna. There's multiple ones in different countries. Everybody's got their unique spin on this. So there's a lot of different technology, a lot of collaboration in the scientific community to make sure that they're safe and effective. But beyond clinical trials, the biggest piece that the CDC just published, earlier this month. I don't remember the date, but it is called Heroes Recover. And if you Google Heroes Recover CDC, it'll pull up the MMWR article. They looked at a population, and a population at high risk, so frontline workers, and they looked at vaccinated versus unvaccinated. So these are people who have a defined exposure most days of the week because they're working in those health centers.
Yeah.
And what they saw over the 3.5 months of the study was that if you were vaccinated, you were 35 times less likely to get COVID. What they didn't say is whether that was asymptomatic or symptomatic. They didn't make that distinction because they were PCR testing everybody every week. So it was either yes or no. But what we see in actual practice is when people do become infected with COVID, most cases are mild. Most cases are asymptomatic. If you do have symptoms, that's really where we start looking at breakthrough cases. At the population level, so those population mechanics I was talking about earlier, it really comes down to examining what went on in Israel, because Israel had a mass vaccination program where they rolled it out to as many people. Of their eligible population, about 85% got it and were fully vaccinated. And this data was supported by what we saw internally across the US in states like Texas, Vermont, Michigan, and others that have published their data sets as vaccines are rolling out. And the magic number seems to be right around 57, 58%. Funny how that's the same number we're looking to get to. And so that's really the number that helps decrease both cases, but also severe cases that lead to hospitalization. And so that's the big driver of that magic number that we talked about earlier, that 57%.
Mike, some parents are worried about the teen vaccines. What can you tell them about that?
Good question. So first, I'm not a doctor. I work with a lot, but I'm not one. So if there is a conversation, if there's a worry, a concern, talk to a physician, talk to your pediatrician, talk to whoever your child sees, and just bring those concerns up and ask if the vaccination is right for your child, for your family, and get the take from a physician. But the short answer is that vaccines, although they can be uncomfortable for a couple days, mine really knocked me on my butt for about a day. Although they're uncomfortable, they are a lot better than the disease itself. So I would be probably a bad epidemiologist if I didn't say that. Remember that COVID in children is generally more mild than it is in adults. And we're still trying to figure out the why, but there's a lot of good theories out there. So as we think about vaccination rates, as we think about that choice to have students vaccinated, really it's about weighing benefits with risks. And so some of the benefits is that we have seen 100% efficacy in the clinical trials for this exact age group,
Yeah,
which is better than in adults. It's awesome.
And so rare for vaccines ever to be 100% effective for anything.
Right. And that number may change slightly as we do mass rollouts. I think we just hit the 4.5 million mark for vaccines delivered in that age group. So we're still going to keep those longitudinal studies going. We're still going to keep our eyes on that and make sure that if that number changes, we communicate it and we can adjust risk decisions appropriately. But some of the other benefits is if you're vaccinated, you don't have to quarantine after an exposure because of that huge risk reduction that we have seen. Another piece is that you don't need to test for COVID unless you have signs and symptoms. And so eliminating that brain swab that happens is sometimes one of the best things that you could do. Additionally, vaccinated people have fewer restrictions, so travel opens up. You have a lower chance of symptoms. Your chance of hospitalization or worse is decreased significantly. But vaccines do have some limitations. As we will probably find out, there will be breakthrough cases. So people that were vaccinated that still became infected with COVID-19. And that's to be expected. We saw it most recently, I think, with the Yankees. They had 9 or so people that, although they were vaccinated, ended up testing positive. And they only caught it because of surveillance testing. So they were asymptomatic. They never would have known. And from what we know, with those lower viral shed limits, so 70 to 90% less virus is escaping a vaccinated person's body, they probably wouldn't have known, and they probably would not have spread it to anybody else. But I think the biggest piece, and this is the driver for a lot of our decisions in our family, is that as you vaccinate, you have more confidence in the ability to see your elder relatives, so grandparents in our case, and great grandparents on my wife's side. And so after 450 days of COVID and restrictions, being able to have confidence and hug somebody is just pretty darn awesome. And my mom got to meet her grandson for the first time over Easter because of vaccinations and our confidence in them. So that's been our big driver. But really, it's about figuring out what the right benefits are for you and does it outweigh the risks. And risks are always real. They're real with everything, and you always hear when you hear a drug commercial on TV, side effects may include, and then 4 hours of somebody saying all these random words. So what we know right now is that we're still in that observational period. We're still watching what happens at the 3-month, at the 6-month mark. However, the scientific community is pretty confident because mRNA, the pieces within this, all the vaccine ingredients are safe for the human body. Like we said earlier, there's already 19 clinical trials in the pipeline for BioNTech or BioNTech. So that's good. It's promising. It shows that this isn't a stop in a use of a new technology. It's a company that's already investigating, already looking into this, and already putting their data to the CDC and the FDA for consideration. What I will say is that 100% you cannot shed your vaccine to other people, which is sometimes a concern, and it's not going to change your DNA. It does not have the mechanism to get into the nucleus. It doesn't have the mechanism to recode and become a part of DNA. So just to put those two pieces out there. But then there's things where we talk about where we see something happening and we want to know, is it simply correlated, so a coincidence, or is it something that is caused by a vaccine? So the first one I'll talk about is heart inflammation. So what we know is that with the Pfizer vaccine, in males under 30, there was observed to be almost 89 cases of heart inflammation. And so the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, the CDC, a lot of doctors all looked at each and every individual case. And what they're assessing is this in excess of what we would expect as our baseline? And right now, there's an advisory out to pediatricians to keep an eye out, but what we're seeing is within the tolerance of what's expected. So that's a correlation. It's not a causation. Once again, a correlation and slightly biologically plausible to be a causation might be an impact to menstrual cycles. And so what we're seeing is that as your body fights off this infection or what it sees as an infection, some changes to the regularity, the cycle of the cycle can change. And so it's biologically plausible. And we do see impacts like this from other vaccinations like influenza. So it does happen. So it's important to note that it's likely to be a causation, but it's temporary. And from what we know from other vaccines, it doesn't last long. There's no long-term impacts. A second one is impacts to male performance. And so once again, temporary, it's correlated. It could be a causation based on the way that the vaccine interacts and the way that the body is attacking that spike protein, but more stuff is needed. I think that those were two correlations and one causation, or one likely causation that we were going to look at. And so those are really what we look at as we think about safety, as we think about efficacy, as we think about the risks. And so weighing those risks with the benefits, being able to travel and have no restrictions and just live life the way that we used to. Once again, that's an individual decision. So it's up to the families to decide.
Those risks, am I understanding, Mike, are temporary that you described?
Absolutely. So all of them have been temporary. All of them have been associated within the realm of possibility from either the first or the second shot. And what we know from the heart inflammation is it remained mild and has gone away. So these are all considerations, is that temporary impact. And in two of those cases, so with male performance and with menstrual cycles, we have seen this before in other vaccines.
And with the heart inflammation, am I understanding correctly that there's not much difference in the incidence of that heart inflammation normally in sort of in normal populations versus those same populations at the same size undergoing vaccination?
Absolutely.
There's no uptick. Okay.
Yep. What we're seeing is exactly what we would expect. If there were no vaccines, we would still expect a similar number. But yeah, as with everything, there's always caveats, and that's where these longitudinal studies will stay with patients. And you might be asked questionnaires if you get vaccinated, and that's really just to assess, has anything happened that wasn't reported? And that way we get a more full picture of what's happening.
Sure. So, Mike, here's another big question, because is what about kids who are under the age of 12 and are too young for the what I call the teen vaccine? Can you tell us a little bit about the vaccine for younger children, and also just about your own children's ages and what your plans are around vaccinating them?
Two awesome questions. So the vaccine for children under 12 is probably not going to be around until mid to late of this year. So probably toward the holiday season of 2021. So with that, there might be some restrictions in the sixth grade classes, the incoming sixth grades. But what we're going to do is we're going to remove people out of our population considerations. So the sixth graders will not weigh in on that 57%. So really, we're looking at, of the eligible population, have we hit 57%? Because those are the ones that are going to take the full use out of those restrictions becoming lifted. And as for my own kids, I have a 7-year-old, and she's at a high risk. She's a type 1 diabetic, and I've got a 1-year-old next week. He'll be 1. And so as soon as they are available, I'm definitely going to vaccinate my kids.
Thank you. Mike, what about large indoor events, like, or large events generally, indoor dances, having audiences for musicals, indoor breakfast for grand friends day? What's our likelihood there, or when might we know enough to know about that?
Yeah, I think we're going to learn a lot about what next year is going to look like for these large events as we go through the summer, as things open up in the state, as more people go to larger events. And remember that, and just that caveat of, we're still subject to the guidelines of New Hampshire. So these are planning pieces. These are things that we think will happen. But if the state of New Hampshire says don't do it, then the best course of action is not to do it. But in a ideal world, once we get to those vaccine levels for the student population, as we get to case rates that are very manageable, opening up student and parent activities is more than likely going to happen. So we're going to start bringing back some of those things that we've missed. So plays, musicals, indoor activity, Grand Friends Day, welcome back to school picnics. These are all things that can start to happen again, and in a normal fashion as well. And really, what we look at is the availability of vaccines, the lead time for people to have made the choice on the adult population, and then people will have either been vaccinated or not by the time that we start opening up to these. So that choice will have been made. And so lifting of restrictions, people will still be able to wear masks if they feel like it. People will still be able to distance as much as they want to, but we're going to open it up and make this feel more normal, like we would have felt in 2018, 2019.
So, Mike, this week we've talked a little bit about those sixth graders who are likely to be not eligible for the teen vaccine. And we may need, and again, May is the operative word because it's only May, so we have a lot of time left. But we may need to start them out masked and 3-foot distanced. If we reach our vaccination targets for the older grades, what Mike and I are thinking is that we won't need to cohort the sixth grade, so they will mix at least with other sixth graders, which was not the case as much this year, because the chance of viral spread is going to be low with low state case numbers and high vaccination numbers amongst our older kids and our teachers. And then once the sixth graders can get vaccinated and their rates climb, then we will move to optional masking and optional distancing. But there's also this uncertainty, right? That if the case numbers in the state are super low and the vaccination rates for our older students are super high, then we may be able to more quickly go to either optional masking or optional distancing, right, Mike? Is that make sense for those?
It does. It absolutely makes sense.
And then, of course, the caveat to all of this is that if case rates go up in the state, then we'll again revisit decisions for what works best. And we will be making our decisions based on what works for vaccinated students, if that makes sense. So I'm going to go to some of the questions that have come in from our email, communications@derryfield.org. So a question that's come in is, do parents need to email their vaccine dates? And what's going to happen is what's in your email right now is this intent to vaccinate. And I believe it asks, is your intention to have your child fully vaccinated by July 31st? And the reason it's July 31st is then our nurse comes back and she'll have 2 weeks to kind of make sure that everybody's data is up to date. We also hope that we're going to know that because you've put into Magnus the Magnus health system, your vaccine card for your child, or a copy of your vaccine card for your children. So that's how we'll know the vaccine dates. Question is, will restrictions be different for vaccinated versus unvaccinated students? So our hope is, again, because we want to respect privacy and that we want to respect all of our students, that we will try to have as little difference amongst the vaccinated and unvaccinated kids as possible. And that's why, say in the sixth grade, for example, if only a quarter of them are vaccinated to start the year, we will still treat all the sixth graders with the same health guidelines until we feel like we can move the whole cohort of sixth graders to a new place. So get your seatbelt on, Mike. Here's a hard question. Can you compare the cardiac side effects from vaccine to the rates of lasting long-term cardiac side effects from COVID illness?
So it's hard to do right now off the top of my head. But what I can do is I can do that comparison and I can send it out in an email as a follow-up. But what we'll definitely look at is what we have seen so far. But really what we're trying to assess is what is that full picture? What does that full picture of an infection look like? And what are the long-term effects on cardiovascular health? That's a piece that is still evolving, and the data is not looking all that promising right now for recovery after a COVID infection that's made its way to the heart and has had some heart complications.
Terrible. Yeah. So just on another note, we hope to have a final understanding or decision on whether we can reopen with optional masks and optional distancing when we get everybody's Magnus information by July 31st. But please don't wait to vaccinate. And please don't wait to tell us. So that intent statement that's in your email, am I pleading enough that people respond to that intent to vaccinate email as soon as possible, because that really affects the kind of retreats that we can plan. And actually, even starting next week, ordinarily faculty and staff would be planning retreats for the fall. It impacts the kind of classes we can plan, the kind of preseason sports we can run, really everything. So in closing, Mike, thank you so much for being here and for all the wonderful advice that you provided for us to make this year run as smoothly as it did. So thank you, thank you.
It's been a pleasure, and I will send you out that comparison of rates and impact of cardio impact from the vaccine and rates and impact from infections.
Excellent. We'll put that in nuts and bolts when we get
Awesome.
that. Nuts and bolts is our newsletter. So thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Bye, Mike. So now I want to welcome Sharon Rolfs and Bob Gruenbeck, who are both Derryfield parents. I invited them to join us because we realized that if you are a new student or a new parent, new to Derryfield this year, then you don't know what Derryfield with optional masks or no masks and no distance is even like. And so to understand especially the parent experience, I invited two veterans. And so Bob and Sharon, if you could please introduce yourselves, that would be great.
I'm Sharon Rolfs. I am the mom of three daughters. My oldest just graduated from college, and my youngest will be graduating this in a week, I guess. And I also hosted a German, so I have a German daughter, a German exchange student, and live in New Boston.
My name is Bob Gruenbeck. I have two boys currently at Derryfield, one in the 7th grade, one in the 9th grade. And I apologize if the wind gets in my microphone. I am currently at a lacrosse game, which is not.
Thank you, Bob. My hair is a very good wind gauge as well. We can watch that happen there. So what the question I just want to put out to you and leave you to talk with each other really is, in normal times, how do parents connect with Derryfield and how do parents make friends with other parents?
Do you want me to start? You know, I reflected on this question simply because I'm kind of at the tail end of my, Derryfield experience with my daughter actively at the school. And I remember kind of going to, my engagement was her initial engagement. I kept telling her, like, new school, new experience, get involved, attend all those fall offerings. So her initial engagements was kind of my initial engagement as well. And I remember going to that first back to school picnic, probably back in, 2013. And I felt like a new kid. I mean, I did know one family that had an older, they were in the older grade, so they kind of welcomed me. But I remember sitting, the tables all lined with the grad school, the class of 2017, and sat down with a bunch of strangers, and basically engaged. And what I think it was, extremely nerve-wracking, and I'm pretty social. So for me to say that, I understand kind of the angst of immersing yourself in a new environment. But I think what I found was those parents that I met that night, I then saw them, on the field hockey sidelines. I saw them in open house. We volunteered to put on a freshman breakfast. Again, not something that's been able to happen this year due to COVID. And really felt pretty comfortable talking to these people when I met up with them again at a parent class gathering that was in October. And I think the only other message that I have, I've been actively involved. I think, I've been there 9-10 years. And I think, help when help is needed is kind of been my motto. I've kind of lent a hand to people who were running things, but I also, took on activities that got me involved. And it's, really, I had prom pictures at my house for the kids this past, and it's just been great to not only see the kids grow into beautiful adults, but also, these are lifelong friends that I've made.
From our perspective, Jennifer and I really seen both sides of what happened here before COVID. Our seventh grader, our current seventh grader, really started to get the grades. And then COVID hits. Our ninth grader, I'll be honest, we don't even know most of half of his classmates right now. So that's been very.
Ooh, Bob, we're having trouble hearing you or seeing you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Is that better now?
Better, yeah.
Better. Sorry, it's always call comes in right at the wrong time. so for us, the social end of Derryfield really started in very small, random ways. Because really, at some point, we're all brand new to this community, and we're coming from all sorts of towns and so on. But we start meeting, cheering on sports teams from the sidelines, cookouts before a big game, going to the art show or seeing the middle school play, watching a talent show or the play. All of those things were great opportunities to start getting to meet your kids' new friends and parents and so on. And then there's the bigger events, the class parties, the spring carnival. And my personal favorite was the Derryfield boot camp for new parents. Jeff Hastings' outdoor classes on things was dynamite. So, the opportunities to mingle and to get to know parents was really quite numerous. And you just had to start getting a little bit involved. It doesn't have to be a full-time job. But coming out of this, and I'm really hopeful after hearing this conversation tonight, that come fall, Jennifer and I are committed to working with the school, committed to really trying to get it so that when we come out of this, we can reinvent our whole community the way we want, make it bigger, stronger than it ever was. And to me, that's going to be a really optimistic sign, because after all, we've all survived this pandemic, and not only the kids, but the parents too deserve a great new start to this community. So that's all I have today.
Thank you so much, Bob and Sharon. The Parent Faculty Association is another, called the PFA, is another organization that is reinventing itself and rebooting, and that will provide lots of opportunities as well. But I just can't thank you enough, Bob and Sharon. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. And thanks to everybody for listening. I so appreciate you listening. Again, just want to remind you of that email, that's that letter of intent. That's if you could turn that around tonight, that would be great, but definitely by next Wednesday would be wonderful. And we'll have another fire pit chat in July, and we'll have more news for you at that point. But for now, let's just lift a glass in gratitude to this wonderful year that we've had. It's just been terrific. Oh, I don't have a glass. I don't have a drink. Oh, thank you, Moose. Thank you so much. So cheers to us all, and especially you, Moose. Cheers.